It's so nice to see everyone again virtually. You're on season 3 of Music and Chat with Shueh-li Ong, and it's a good morning from me to you in Singapore. Please say hi in the live chat right there and let us know where you're tuning in from. Don't be backward and coming forward. And remember that live chat right there is for you to put in your questions during the live stream, and I shall attend to them as the stream moves along. You know that there'll be a 30 to 90 second lag, so be quick about putting your questions in so that we can get to them before the stream ends. And please subscribe if you enjoyed this broadcast. Thank you. I want to say hi to our good friend Gary Mayulo from Frederick, Maryland, assuming that's where he is right now, and someone from New York. I am not quite sure what the moniker says. Is that an I or an L? I-7. Let us know how we can address you so that if we have a group chat, we can refer to you by name, I-7. Samuel Flame, if I got that name right. Hi, Samuel. Let us know where you're tuning in from as well. And one of our guests, Rory, has decided to say hi to Sam. Obviously, he knows Sam. So let us know where you're tuning in from. It's wonderful to have you guys here this my morning, your evening somewhere, or maybe afternoon, midday, who knows? The world is just fantastic that way in terms of the time zones, which often makes me wonder how cool it would be to be able to time travel. We have our friend Kevin as well from New York City. And our friend I-7 is actually L-7. L-7, how shall we address you? Do you have a first name? Another good friend from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania is Mike Flavin. It's wonderful to see you all again. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about inconsequential stuff because it's a wonderful live stream today. We have our friends Rory Kaplan and Chris Currell who will join us in a few minutes. And I usually say this, I report the time. It's 9:34 from Singapore. Let us know what time it is where you are. So speaking of guests, our guest today toured the world as members of Michael Jackson's band from 1987 to 89. This tour covered cities. How many cities were there? I think several cities. If I'm not wrong, 15 countries. But they went from Tokyo to Sydney, Australia. Any Sydney, Australian friends here? Atlanta, Georgia, USA to Rome. Oh, beautiful city, Rome. London to Barcelona. 123 concerts, and 16 months later, they went their separate ways. You and I had the privilege of knowing Rory and Chris individually on Music and Chat. They reunite today right here. But before I welcome them, please let me perform a movement from my concerto for you. I called it calor or calor, which means hot in terms of ambient temperature, not hot as in spicy. So I named it that because it just felt like it was the right name, and I recorded the video of it on a summer's day. Where did I record it again? I have forgotten. Anyway, thanks to those of you who have bought my music. Your support has meant much to me. And I see that Chris Currell has also joined the live chat to say hi to everyone. So I don't want to waste any more precious time. Let me play you Calor on the theremin. And so I'll turn on my theremin cam. So that was Galore from my concerto, one of the several movements I've been working on. I've actually started another movement, so I can't wait to play it for you. So, let's welcome Rory and Chris in, shall we? Let me just turn on the Skype screen or scene and I shall call them. Fingers crossed, hope this works. Here we go. Hello there, you two. Hey, Rory. Hi, Chris.
Hey. Hello.
It's so good to see you two.
Wait a minute, let me get rid of this thing. Okay, there you go.
So, does seeing each other again bring back any memories? Do you kind of like want to give them a friendly punch or a bro hug or something?
Yeah, man, it's been a long time.
Oh, it's been, I'd say, at least 20 years.
Oh my God.
When was the last time you saw each other? Was this, post Bat tour, or did you see each other after that?
Chris lived near me for a short time, and then moved to Japan. So we've been missing him since.
Yep. I think we saw each other one time when was it? I don't know. I think we saw each other in LA for a short time.
Yeah.
So 20 years ain't too bad. Let us remind our viewers, some of us here have seen you individually on my live stream, and some of us here have probably just read anecdotes or articles about what you guys had been doing up till the Bat tour and post-Bat tour. But let us just remind our viewers what you were doing individually up until the Bat tour. And I'm going to just do a quick summary for each of you, and you tell me if I went wrong somewhere. So for Rory, at least what I know of your achievement, you toured as technician and programmer on the Return to Forever tour. Thereafter, you began working for Fairlight. While there, Fairlight manager Frank DiLeo, did I say his name right? DiLeo?
Frank DiLeo.
DiLeo? The emphasis is on the Leo. Frank DiLeo requested that you put together a band for the Bat tour, where your technical and musical expertise was put to great use for the length of the engagement. Is that kind of what happened?
It's kind of pseudo mixed up, because what I just found out from Greg Phillingaines, and I know from Chris, we were talked to individually, but no one talked to us together. So Frank called me and said, we want you to audition and put together the band for the Bat tour. Not knowing, Michael asked Greg Phillingaines to do the tour, but he was negotiating with them, and Chris and I weren't privy to that at the time. And Chris was wrapping up the Bat album, and preparing stuff to do the Bat tour. So Chris and I were paired together by Frank DiLeo and Michael's team to work together to put the auditions together and proceed and find the other bass player, guitarist, the other keyboard player, etc. That's kind of my recollection. And then talking to Greg, who wanted to be the musical director, he never had any part in picking the band.
Gotcha. Rory, I think your other device could have its volume up somewhat because you're echoing a little bit.
I think I have two of our
Two of you?
windows up, possibly. I'm going to check. Yeah, which is not a good thing. Let me see where I'm at.
Yeah, I did notice you logged in as two separate individuals on Skype.
I told you I don't know this stuff.
So you have a Rory 1 and a Rory 2.
Well, is it working now, or is it better, or?
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay, I'm just going to go with this. I
Thanks,
don't want to touch
Rory.
anything. Okay.
I know technology, I know we love it. We use it constantly. I guess that could be our little downfall once in a while because it's not 100% predictable. That's a fun part, but at the same time, things always go somewhat astray when it's live. Always happens.
Keeps us on our toes.
Sorry, Chris?
Keeps us on our toes.
So on to Chris, my little blurb that I've summarized of you pre-Bat Tour. Chris was interested in the mini mode, but discovered the Synclavier instead. And you taught at UCLA for a short while before you were invited to produce for a few Warner Brothers Records artists. And then consequently, through Synclavier's West Coast distributor, Danny Yeager, who sound designed for Michael Jackson, or did not want to sound design for Michael Jackson, you got the job. You taught Michael and wound up working for him for 4 years, thereabouts.
Something like that.
Something like that. So I'll start with Chris. Since this live stream is all about Bat, or primarily about Bat, let's begin with the Bat track. Chris, you considered yourself as music translator for Michael for this album. During our last chat, you mentioned that I guess I could call myself a music translator. Did you begin work on this immediately upon teaching him the Synclavier, or after? We're talking about Bat, the song.
Well, when I was teaching him, he was still in the process of doing demos for the coming album. We didn't know what the name of it was going to be or anything like that. So I came in at that time and started working on demos as well. And they ended up being on the album. And the album, it was called Bat. But when I joined, there was no album yet. It was just coming, but we didn't really know when.
Oh, right. So you could say that he was already working on what would eventually be called the Bat album then.
Yeah,
They were kind of...
I think he did something like 50 songs or something.
Oh, wow. Do you have any recollection of as to how the name came about? Was it an inspired name, or he already knew that he wanted to call the song Bat, so, the musical assets followed the title of the song, if you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, if I recall, I think it was Michael's idea, and he presented it to Quincy, and Quincy thought it was a good idea, but if the album wasn't good, it was not going to be a good situation because the album would be called Bad. So he had to make a really good album.
I remember one of my first musical activities, I guess I could call it that, in the USA. I moved to the States in 2005, and my first port of call was Dallas, Texas, more like Dallas-Fort Worth, and I was introduced to the term bad, and bad, of course, is good.
Exactly.
It's a figure of speech, I suppose. That was a bad solo. It was bad? No, it was good. So, could I then say that you and Michael were the primary composers or compositors of the song Bad?
The song itself, I suppose I was really credited mostly with arranging, but it was kind of a collaborative effort because we weren't really thinking about who was doing what. It was kind of just a pot of ideas that, all the songs were kind of like that. They're just contributed ideas by various people, not just me. But the bad song specifically, that was all created on the Synclavier, and it just built up, into what it turned out to be. But I had a lot to do with that particular song, yeah.
So speaking of sound assets, I have a few questions because I listened to it again a couple of times, and I noticed the spots where you would have percussion, so to speak, hi-hats and other things. There are sounds which occupy those spots, but there are other worldly sounds. I
Yeah.
call them thud. I got here thud-like sounds, but they take the place of percussion. So were these created on the Synclavier, I suppose, right? Because
Yeah.
that was your machine.
We created them in various places. That was mostly my job, creating the sounds. And they're originated from various different sources, but I would sample the sounds and then build them into actual musical instruments on the Synclavier. It's interesting because on Bad, you said that some of these are strange sounds that would kind of take the place of traditional sounds. My idea was, of course, would be a funky guitar, picking notes on that kind of a song. It would just be obvious that would happen. But rather than do the obvious, why don't we try to do something a little bit different? So what I did is I took a rubber band, and I took some pieces of styrofoam and put some nails in it and stretched the rubber band and got a good pitch on it, and then I sampled that and then created that on the keyboard and then played the parts. That's why on the album it's called Rubber.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't capture a screenshot of the album cover. I should have. But wow, that's cool. So
I was going to say that sound that Chris did, because I remember when we stripped down the songs to get everyone's parts together, it was a pulse, actually, if I recall, Chris, that it kind of was the glue of the rhythm track.
Yeah, it really took the place of a funky guitar part, that kind of purpose in the track musically, but it was, this boing, boing, boing rubber band kind of sound, but it was kind of tight, so it wouldn't be totally flopping around, but that's kind of how I like to approach, the album with Michael, was there's the traditional way of doing things, but let's just twist it a bit and, make it a little bit different.
Was this your idea or Michael's idea? Or was just both of you treating it like your playground and you just went and picked whatever you felt? You know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's a very, very organic process. No one's really saying something specific. It just happens.
It was kind of both, but he always would give me a framework, some concept of whatever we were talking about, and then I would just detail it, with the actual sounds, and that's why I thought of myself as an interpreter. Mm-hmm. But I would also just toss out ideas, when it was appropriate, and he seemed to go for it all the time. I don't think there was ever a time that he said, no, I don't like that, which was kind of cool. I guess we were on the same wavelength,
Were there any sounds that came straight from the Synclavier library, so to speak?
Probably a few, maybe some string sounds, maybe, and because my take on it, and I think this is true of all Synclavier owners, we prided ourselves on making the sounds ourselves because it was such a unique instrument and so hi-fi, and so all the Synclavier guys had their own kind of libraries and held on to it, and I did the same. But before the album, I was at Michael's house for half a year just making sounds, and we ended up using a lot of those things. My job, according to Michael, was making unusual sounds. I said, okay, I'll go for that.
That's interesting, right? In an era where I wouldn't say so much presently, but at least in the 90s and post 90s, where having a corporate job with a proper name was a big deal. A maker of unusual sounds is a very interesting job.
Yeah, I would say so. That was my job description. Make the unusual sounds.
I can imagine you introducing yourself to someone you just met. Hi, and my name is Chris, and I'm a maker of unusual sounds. Oh, okay. So, therefore, were Michael's vocals recorded into the Synclavier as well? Were there any experiments with his voice?
Well, demo-wise, he usually recorded his vocals first onto tape, even in the studio or when we were demoing. But eventually, they all went into the Synclavier in one way or the other, especially harmonies, and then put into the song in certain places where they belong and stuff. So at one time or another, almost everything eventually was in the Synclavier, at least for a short period of time. But not everything. There was other tunes. It depended on the tune, but it's largely Synclavier stuff.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Rory, your speech was a bit garbled earlier on with when there were two of you. There was Rory Prime and Rory Doppelganger on at the same time. So it's on to you now. So we understand from our previous chat that you taught Jermaine Jackson the Fairlight, but eventually he thought you were more useful as an asset for the tour. Well, and so you're trying to explain to us that yes, it was Frank, or maybe it wasn't Frank, but we couldn't quite make you out.
Well, the sequence of events goes back to I had just finished a tour with Stevie Wonder in '83, and I was doing Fairlight work with Stevie as well. And I got recommended to Jermaine via Fairlight. Jermaine bought a Fairlight. Stevie had talked to him about it, I believe. And so he bought one, and Fairlight called me up and said, would I train Jermaine? Because he's having a rough time of it. So I went to his house. And he was married to Hazel at the time, and Chris will tell you it's in the 80s, and the zaniest things in the world were in that universe with the Jacksons, and not necessarily. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean in a like, people live like this. I pulled up to Jermaine's house, and in the front yard playing with Jermaine were two baby Bengal tigers about this big, and I just thought, what am I doing? And we went into the house, and we went to where the Fairlight was set up, and I started showing Jermaine the Fairlight, and I had 2 or 3 visits. And on about the 3rd visit, he looked at me and said, honestly, I'm not going to remember this. My brothers and I are doing a tour next year. Do you want to do the tour? And this is a victory tour. And so, and at this time, Thriller had just come out. So for me, it was a dream of mine since Off the Wall to work with Michael and his music, because it was, I had come from working with Chick Corea and a lot of great Crusaders and a lot of jazz artists, but Michael kind of defined in Quincy, that team defined where music was going to take the next level, just as George Martin and the Beatles did. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was an adventure, and I went, yeah, I definitely want to do this. So what happened is months later, I'm at home, and I hear Rick Dees, who was a big pop radio DJ, Kiss FM, kind of syndicated nationwide in the States. And he made this big announcement, how the Jacksons are rehearsing, and it's going to be the biggest tour, and blah, blah, the whole thing. And I thought, oh, shoot, I didn't get the tour. What a drag, because I was so looking forward to it. And about 2 weeks after that announcement, I received a call from Jermaine on a Saturday morning. And he said, Rory, it's Jermaine. I'm in London, but I want you to call my brother Randy, and they're rehearsing at Leeds in North Hollywood, and give him a call. I was like, wow. So I called, and Chris knows we had a tour coordinator, I'd call him, or road manager, Nelson Hayes, who was and is still a wonderful guy. And he had had this low voice when not he had this personality. He just didn't want to give away whether he was happy or sad or whatever. So he answers the phone, and I asked for Randy, and he puts me on hold for 10 minutes, comes back and said, "We already have all the keyboard players." So I was like, okay, well, thank you. So I left a message on Jermaine's home machine, and I get a call Sunday. "Rory, you're doing the tour, or I'm not doing it. I'll see you Monday night at Leeds." And Chris, we were at Leeds with Michael as well, weren't we?
Yeah. Kind of similar
Leeds.
story in a way.
Yeah, so Leeds was like this great place. A friend of mine, Andy Leeds from high school, he owned it, and it was where Toto and Chick and Michael and Madonna, a lot of major acts. It was a quaint rehearsal place, but really well equipped and kind of in an industrial area away from everything. So anyways, I showed up and Jermaine showed up, and there was some animosity with the other keyboard players because they had auditioned and had been working at it for 2 weeks. And I walked in with the Fairlight, and I had the beginning of Beat It on the Fairlight, and I had the voices for Billie Jean and hand claps and the sounds, because we were still, the way the Bad tour started, by the way, and this is important because it evolved. The Bad album hadn't come out yet, and our first leg was Japan and Australia. So Michael thought it'd just be easy enough to take the Victory tour, which was really Jackson's with Off the Wall and Thriller songs injected into their catalog, continue that, but take out as many Jackson songs as possible and add 1 or 2 or 3 new songs from the Bad album, which would have been I Can't Stop Loving You, Bad, and Man in the Mirror. I think those were the 3 songs that were definite in the first legs of the tour.
I do have a copy of the tour set list. Let's see if I can find it. Tour set list. Here we are, and I also need to introduce Rory into this. Let's see. Here we go. There we are. All right, so that's a tour set list, at least what I found online. And it's got a Wannabe Starting Something, This Place, Hotel, A Heartbreak Hotel, Another Part of Me, She's Out of My Life, I Can't Stop Loving You, I Want You Back. It looks like it's got 3 names.
That's a Motown medley. Yeah, that's the Motown medley. We did like bits of I Want You Back, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There.
Thank you.
Yes, and then, so then there's more of the Thriller album, Human Nature, Rock With You from Off the Wall, Smooth Criminal, that's a Chris Currell hit. Dirty Diana, Chris Currell at the beginning of that too. Thriller. Bad Groove was a piece that evolved. By the time we hit Wembley Stadium, it had become a real piece. But it was a chance for Michael, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a chance for Michael to get about 5-10 minutes to change, get some hydration and get ready for the next part of the show. So it was a band jam that Greg had framed, and Chris did a solo. Don Boyette, our bass player, had a solo. Greg did Greg's solos were always interweaved with whoever was in the audience. So if Eric Clapton was in the audience, or Prince was in the audience, or whoever it was, and we knew about it, or the Bee Gees, he would do a medley with their songs in the solo, which, he's not even human, Greg. Let's move on. And then there, see, I'm looking at the thing. So then there was Working Day and Night from Off the Wall, Beat It, Thriller, Billie Jean, Bad from the new album, The Way You Make Me Feel. That's right, The Way You Make Me Feel, and Man in the Mirror. So those songs were interweaved with the kind of an overlap from the Victory tour. And by the time we finished Japan and Australia, it was December when we came back. And I think we set up at Leeds again. My role, after Greg became musical director, Chris focused on all the Synclavier and making sure all the parts that needed to be presented live were and he had to do some homework because some of the tempos were a little different, some of the keys wound up a little different, and Chris kind of came up with these, I will call them algorithm for compression and time before they were even a standard in Pro Tools now or any of the software. So Chris was kind of working out these technical problems mathematically. And I remember this because it blew me away. If he had to stretch a vocal, he never made it sound like Minnie Mouse or Darth Vader. He always knew how to, if we had to, because not in this particular song, but like Working Day and Night, if you listen to Off the Wall, it's a nice tight groove. It's just a groove piece. But for production, Michael wanted it about 3 times faster because he had a vision of the dancing and the lighting and the pace of the show. So it was and so we had to learn its horn parts and parts fast and stuff. But in certain parts, in certain songs, Michael wanted them sped up or slowed down or however he wanted. And Chris had to interpret that information. And if he had sound effects or background parts or Vincent Price vocal for Thriller in the Synclavier, it had to line up with our tempos. So that in itself, he did in a short order that would have taken probably some programmer up in Silicon Valley or the guys at New England Digital spending 5 years to do, and Chris figured it out in like a week. So that was one of the things that blew me away with Chris on that. And then my role was to reprogram all the synthesizers. And we had we had Eddie Reynolds in LA, who was one of the top keyboard techs. And I had Tim Meyer, who was another amazing guy from Cooper Electronics. He and I worked together previously with Chick. So it was a really good team. And then Mitch Marcoulier, Chris brought on to help him with the supervision with the Synclavier and the technical needs. And then we had a guy named Rand Ballard, I think, who came on and helped Greg. But I got the bulk of all our horn sounds, because we try to make the horns different on every song. And Chris had some horns on the Synclav too. So we didn't want generic horns and generic strings. And, like it was such a big tour. I didn't want it to sound like, a cheap thrill. Oh yeah, here's my horn sound on the Roland keyboard. Here's my Yamaha piano sound. We took everything from scratch and we programmed everything per what the song was. And that's what took, we had a lot of 24-hour days. Chris spent a lot of sleepless nights, I did. But the team was great, and the thing about that tour, and especially with Michael, and in that time of Michael's life, Michael was at the crown of his career at that time, and everybody hired on that tour were handpicked. And so the work ethic, the dedication, and the loyalty to make a perfect show was the perfect storm. And I mean, if Greg was musical director from the beginning, I don't think I would have been on the tour. Greg probably would have had a couple of other guys he would have liked. And that's just the reality. But God's infinite wisdom and way, things worked out the way they did. And Greg finally negotiated his deal a couple of weeks after we started auditioning. And I remember Chris and I and John Clark, Ricky Lawson, and I think Jennifer Batten might have been there too. We were in Leeds by ourselves. And from the back door came Greg Phillingaines with his Cheshire Cat smile. And he looked at all of us and says, "I'm here." And so we were really happy. I mean, Chris had been working with Greg on the album, so they already had a relationship. I used to only read Greg's credits, and I knew who he was. We spoke once to buy a mini Moog of mine, but I idolized Greg. So to be working with him was just like the other perfect storm. And so Greg took what he had in all of us, and he made all of us, to me, he made all of us better musicians. That's kind of what he did. And as a musical director, that's what you'd expect. Some guys are more about themselves, but Greg was about getting the team in shape and making sure we were ready for prime time. And he was gracious, and between him and Michael working together and Chris, they carried the weight, of the show, and but everybody stepped up, and it was a magical time too. Like I said, you couldn't get in the car and turn on the radio without hearing "I Can't Stop Loving You" or "Bad" or I'm trying to think what other song was released at that time. It was pretty early on because the album got released in Japan when we got there, but it didn't get released in the States until the end of December, beginning of January, I think. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So did you know each other prior to the Bat tour, you and Chris, or Chris and you?
I heard Chris's name, but we never worked together. No.
Yeah. I think when it was panic mode when we found out that the tour was going to actually occur, and it caught us off guard, and we got in touch with each other immediately and tried to figure out a game plan.
I mean, and this is how it happened too. So I was on tour with Chick Corea with his electric band, and during this particular time, I was Chick's technician again. So I was programming the synths for this electric band tour, and we were somewhere like in Tennessee, I think in Knoxville, and Frank DiLeo left me at that time. I wasn't carrying a cell phone. I had a tape machine at home with voicemail. So I would check in, and I got Frank's message. He says, "Rory, give me a call. It looks like Michael wants to do his first solo tour, and your name came up. Give me a call." So I called Frank, and he said, "Listen, Michael liked what you did with the Fairlight on the Victory Tour. Are you interested in doing this new tour if we do it?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Call me in a couple of weeks." So I had called him back. He says, "Look, I can't guarantee anything, but you're on the list." So I had to give Chick 2 weeks notice. It was a gamble because I'd rather be playing with Michael, which was my dream, than twisting and turning knobs and programming. I really wanted to play more. And so it was, and Chick was a mentor too. So this doesn't take away from Chick. What I learned from him is like, he was the champion of keyboard players, and I learned a lot. But anyways, I gave my 2 weeks notice, got this friend of Chick's to replace me, flew back to LA, and about a week later, I had Michael's office phone number at Havenhurst. And the girl that was working for him at the time, her name was Candy. And I called her up and I said, "Candy, it's Rory. I tried to get a hold of Frank. I just want to see what's going on." Because like Chris said, it was ramping up quick, and we knew things were going on behind the scenes, but we weren't plugged in yet. And I said, "Candy, what do you know anything?" She goes, "Well, Rory, I can't tell you anything officially, but unofficially you got the gig." And then I screamed like a 16-year-old does, except I was 28 or 9, and whatever. And I wound up screaming. And I got a call from Frank the next day, and he goes, "Go get a hold of Nelson Hayes. You're going to set up at Leeds." And then I did that. And then I got the call to talk to Chris. And then Chris and I connected at the beginning, at that first day or two. And we sort of looked at each other kind of like, we got to roll up our sleeves and figure this out. And when I heard the album, there was a lot to learn. There was a lot of material to learn. Chris had done his homework already and had transferred a lot of stuff, like the beginning sounds to Smooth Criminal or Dirty Diana. It's like Billie Jean. As soon as you hear the drum beat, you know what song it is. And at that time, no one heard the Bad album, but as soon as I heard those signature sounds that the Synclavier did that Chris put together, it was like, wow, this is going to be live. This thing's going to be thunderous, So we knew what we had to do, but we still had to get a band together. And Jonathan Moffat, who was Michael's usual drummer for touring, Jonathan was a great live performing drummer. David Williams was Michael's right-hand guy on guitar. Michael loved David's rhythm, like Chris was talking about guitar picking stuff. He was just the sound of Michael underneath all that. And they were out with Madonna, and they were on an extended tour. Ricky Lawson grew up with Greg Phillingaines and also had just finished with Lionel Richie, but I worked with him with Stevie Wonder. So Ricky was a great guy. And John Clark, Paul Jackson Jr. had recommended John as a stand-in for David Williams. So they were there already. So John Clark was there, Ricky was there. They knew they were going to do the rehearsals with us, go to Japan, do 1 or 2 weekends, and then groove over, like turn over their position to David and Jonathan. Oh. As luck would have it, Madonna extended her tour, and there were some business dealings that we didn't need to know about. And so Frank came to me one morning and said, "How do you like working with Ricky and John?" I said, "They're wonderful. They're great guys." And I said, I worked with Ricky, so I love him. And then he went to Greg later. And I guess Greg and Frank had a musical director management conversation. And they decided the band's already having fun. They're locked in. It was a family already, and we're only like a few weeks into the tour. And to give you a comparison, we auditioned through the third week of July. Greg came in the last week of July. We had full band, dancers, and singers in Hollywood for about 3 weeks, moved to Universal Sound Stages for full lights and sound. And I think we left for Japan September, the first week of September. So realistically, we had 5 weeks of full rehearsals, and that's including programming, Michael's choreography, background, everything together. I got called afterwards regarding the Dangerous tour, and I knew about what was going on with This Is It, and they were taking months to put those shows together, months. So when you have the right team and you have that energy and that synergy that we all had, that was magic. I've never seen it happen before.
I do have a picture of the band and also the names that I discovered from a fan site of the band and background singers. I don't know if you'll see it in a few seconds. Hopefully soon. Here we go.
Yeah, there we go. So on the far right is Ricky Lawson, who is a phenomenal drummer, and we lost him a few years ago. Then you have the dramatic and handsome Chris Currell, who powered over all of us, and Greg Phillingaines. And back to Greg, we have John Clark, who just recently passed away. And I'm looking at another screen to see him, so I apologize for turning. Michael, we have Don Boyette next to Michael, our bass player. Jennifer Batten, who most of Michael's fans know. She's she was the first one to get hired from the auditions. Chris, you help me on the story, but we found out Michael wanted a female guitarist.
Yeah.
So there were more mini skirts and push-up bras coming to rehearsals, auditioning. And one I remember with a clavitar, which was a keyboard controller instrument that she thought would be great looking on stage, but didn't realize that she'd have to play the Beat It solo and do some other things. And we just got tired of it wasn't about the look, it was about needing a musician. And Nelson came up with the idea of going to Musicians Institute and called them up and said, "Send me 2 of your best female guitarists." And Jennifer Batten was one, and the other one, I think her name was Becky. I can't remember her name. but Jennifer just, in fact, I was at Chris's house because I had videotaped Jennifer doing the Beat It solo. She did some Barney Kessel jazz thing, which was, you know, it's like jazz. Okay, she did a little R&B, but you can't really top David Williams unless you're in the league with Paul Jackson and David Williams. And then she did the Beat It solo, and my jaw hit the floor. And I was over at Chris's house because in Woodland Hills at the time, and Michael had called Chris there and said, I really like this girl. We'll bleach her hair blonde. We'll get her contacts. And I remember Chris and I were cracking up after the call. And she was the first one hired. And so, you know, and then we hadn't met the singers and dancers yet. But Sheryl Crow, the funny story is when I was with Chick's drummer, Dave Weckl, grew up with Sheryl. They both were from St. Louis, and she had sang on an album that Dave Weckl had done, one of Dave Weckl's first records. So she came to Chick's studio a year before this happened, and this is kind of a funny story because we met, and she was really nice, and there was another guy named Jay Oliver who was Dave Weckl's best friend, who arranged the strings for Hell Freezes Over album that the Eagles did. And so I remember Sheryl, and I remember very well, and she was very sweet. And I was outside, Chris, all of us were brought over to Hollywood Center Stages. It was Zoetrope. It was Francis Ford Coppola's sound stages. And Greg and I think Chris was there, I know Ricky was there, we were all standing outside when the singers came out. We all met outside the studio there. And I said, Sheryl, and I go to put my hand out, and she walked right past me, and she goes, hi, Greg. And she was a total Greg Phillingaines fan. So I was kind of left in the dust on our first meeting. But we all wound up being really close, and it was, you know, it was that kind of unity that once we started playing together, and the the harmonies the singers were doing were incredible. We had Dorian Hawley, Daryl Finnessy, and Sheryl, and Kevin, Kevin Dorsey. And then we had these dancers that Michael had been working with on his videos. They had done some work with Janet too, but the dancers were great. Eddie, Dominic, Lavelle, and who am I missing? Chris? Why am I missing? Oh, Randy Alari, Eddie Garcia, Dominic Lucero, and Lavelle Smith. Yeah. So, you know, here we are 33, 34 years later, and we still remember everybody like family.
So speaking of the performance, I do have a short video clip of you, Rory, and you, Chris, doing your thing for the bad groove section. There's no audio because Sony will just prevent me from displaying this live stream once it's done. So, but we will see you jiving to the groove and playing your wonderful instruments. So here it is. 1 second, please.
We definitely had fun, Chris.
Yeah, we did.
And I was the whitest dancer you've ever seen.
Well, you both have very interesting hairstyles and costumes. Yeah, if you could call them costumes. So here we are. We should be able to see it now.
Okay.
Oh, there he is.
Oh my God. There's John Clark and Greg and myself. Chris should be coming up here soon. There we go. Wow. Yeah, that was a syntax that triggered the Synclavier.
Yeah.
So I do have a question for Chris about the instrument. So let me just bring you guys back on. So actually, I had a lead up to the question. To Chris, I assume that the sound assets for all the tracks on the Bad album were already ready when you, besides some adjustments, I suppose, from what Rory said for the show. Were you expecting to have to perform the album or tracks from the album as well when you were working on the album, Chris? Did Michael say to you, oh, by the way, when this is done, you're going to be on stage and you're going to dress up in all this gear. Is that okay?
No, it never came up. We never even thought about it,
Yeah.
the live show at all, when we were doing the Bad album. The focus was all, Quincy would say this, Michael would say this all the time, you know, especially Quincy, that, you know, if this album isn't good, there won't be a tour.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
so we wanted to focus, you know, on making, just put our attention on the album. So,
Yeah.
and as the album started, you know, winding down, it was getting near finishing. My job started to lighten up a bit, although I was still needed in 2 or 3 places at once. It was kind of crazy, but I thought, I approached Michael a few times. And I said, I have a little bit of free time, you know. We're going to, you know, the idea is we're going to be performing this in the near future. I should start preparing, you know, because there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
And again, I got the same story, you know, we're not thinking about that right now. We just want to focus on making this best album because otherwise there won't be a tour.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I talked to Frank about it. He goes, yeah, you know, it'll be a couple of months in the, you know, down the line. We're going to start in Japan. I went, oh, okay, maybe, you know, I should start working on this stuff. No, don't worry about it. You know, we just focus on finishing the album. And so I got this story like 2 or 3 times, and finally I just forgot about it, you know, because obviously, you know, it's getting closer and closer to where Frank said, that, you know, that we were probably going to start. And I said, there's no way we can pull this all together in that short a time, you know, so obviously that's history. We just, you know, focus on the album. And I remember coming home after after working in the studio one night. It was like I was watching the 11 o'clock news. Michael Jackson announces world tour. And I went, what? You know, I'm working with him every day. I didn't know what this was, and I just and it was like really short. It was what Frank said.
Yeah.
You know, and I said, you know, and that's when Rory and I got on the phone, and we said, wow, you know, we were both kind of panicking.
It was overwhelming.
Like,
you
how are we
have
going to pull this off?
Did you have the synth X at that time already,
No.
or did you have to acquire it?
I
So
had
what
to
was the
acquire it.
process? Yeah, so was this a process which you went through? It was, I have to do it. I guess I need this, that. Did you create a list of what you would need to make it happen? And did you know what it is exactly you had to make happen? Did Michael or Quincy or anyone in the production team say to you, well, guess what, Chris, you're going to be playing all this, or did you have to work it out yourself?
I had to work it out. There was no input from anyone. So mainly I'm a guitar player.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not a keyboard player. And I was always promoted as such, but I always had to play that down, you know, because I'm not, you know. That's why I thought I had to get a guitar, you know, controller, because the parts that needed to be played on the synthesizer, I had to play them, but it would be easier for me to do it on a synth, you know, guitar controller than on the keyboard, generally, for me.
Yes.
Yeah, but all the ones that were out there were just crap. They wouldn't work. And I tried the Syntax, and in 5 minutes I said, this will work. You know, so I got 2 or 3 of them. They were super expensive because we had to have backups and stuff. And then I had to learn that, you know, and it had never been used with a Synclavier before. So, you know, I had to learn all that stuff really quickly. But I also, in the very beginning, was thinking, well, I'm probably going to play guitar. Michael knows I play guitar, you know. So I assumed he said, because he said he wanted me on the tour. And I said, okay. So I just assumed that I'm going to have to play guitar and guitar synthesizer. I got the equipment, the guitar equipment and everything, but as it turned out, very early on, you know, my work with the Synclavier was far more important. And then he brought on Jennifer, and then John Clark. And I said, well, they got that covered. You know, I'm not an egomaniac. I don't have to play guitar. It was my choice to actually dump it and and just focus on that.
Yeah.
And it was definitely the right decision because there was a lot of work.
Could you give us a couple of examples, perhaps? Because we know that, or at least I don't know if our viewing audience knows this, but I'm aware that the syntax is made up of different sections, so to speak, with different performance possibilities. You have the strings, so to speak, which work beyond what you would find on a guitar, let's say. Then you have keys with aftertouch as well, and I want to know what exactly you used each section for as a synthesist and a synth player. And I know there's several of us in the viewing audience. We're always curious as to know what kind of extended performance activities you did with your instrument. And the syntax is already an extended instrument, so.
Well, basically at the time, and still today even, most guitar, controllers work on a pitch to MIDI conversion. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't really generally work very well, especially stably, where you have to make sure that everything you play comes out perfectly the first time, you know. Mm-hmm. Can't have glitches and weird stuff going on. Mm-hmm. And the syntax worked differently. There was no pitch to MIDI or pitch to voltage kind of type of conversion. What the frets were insulated, so between each string there was insulation. So the frets acted as an actual switch that would turn on and off, you know, the note. So it was, you know, always on, you know, just like playing a keyboard. And then, so that was kind of cool, you know, because it put a lot of stability into the, you know, it took a lot of craziness out of the equation. It has to be performed properly. Mm-hmm. And then the next part of the syntax, in order to get the pitch bending, because you could bend the strings and everything like a guitar, which is what was cool, it had photoelectric sensors under the strings by the bridge, and it could detect how far the string was moving when you pitch bend it, and then that was under electronic control so that you could adjust how much that would equate to a pitch bend. Wow. So that's how you would get the pitch bend. And then it had keys. And this was really quite important because a lot of the stuff that I was going to have to do required polyphonic playing, either with synth pads or strings or something like this, or horn sections or whatever, not just single lines. So on a keyboard, when you're generally playing this kind of thing, you hit the keys all at once, boom. You know, all the notes sound at the same time. With a guitar, that doesn't happen because you're strumming across the strings. So it would come out as an arpeggio, even though it's very fast, but it would be, you know, rather than boom. So with the keys, I got around that. I could just play it like a keyboard. And it was set up very logically for the guitar player. It had, you know, you could have combinations. One key would hit the top three keys or strings, for example, and one key would play the bottom three, or you could play them all individually, or you know, or all at once. Oh. So it was very cool, and it was velocity and pressure sensitive.
So you're saying you could play a chord with one key?
Yeah.
Okay.
You could play a whole chord, all six strings with one key, or with another key you could play the bottom three strings.
Wow.
Or with another key you could play the top three strings, or actually with your palm there was another key there that would play all of them.
Wow.
So you could mix and match. So it ended up kind of the way you would play them was kind of like finger picking a guitar, except instead of picking and pulling the strings, you're pushing. So you could get them, you could, you know, articulate and attack the notes any way you wanted. So that was really cool. And it had a pitch bender, but that was again under electronic control. So you could pitch bend anything. It didn't really actually pitch bend the strings, electronically pitch bend it.
Got it.
So you could trigger the strings either by picking them or with the keys, or you could fret it, a different mode where you could just left hand tapping, which is what started me doing a lot of tapping things. It started doing that. So the syntax was quite sophisticated at the time. Still is. It still was. Even today, it was pretty sophisticated. But it had some issues because live, if there was any radio frequencies in the area, it would just trigger the strings automatically. I mean, it happened at rehearsals and stuff. I'd be playing, and all of a sudden, blang, and everybody would look at me like, "What the hell are you doing?" I'm like, I didn't do anything. So we figured it out that that's what was happening, and the techs pulled it apart. I remember the first time we pulled it apart to look inside, and I've never seen an instrument so jammed with electronics. I mean, every bit of space in that thing was jammed with electronics. And we lined the whole thing with copper foil to insulate it. We put ferrite beads on the strings that would help with static. We did all kinds of stuff. I cut it down, all that problem down quite a bit, but then we had to make it a radio-free zone around. Nobody would walk around with a walkie-talkie or a phone.
This was funny. We'd be sound checking, or actually in the middle of a show.
Yeah.
And didn't realize that the radio signals for either the concussion bombs that would do the fireworks stuff, and or if anyone was walkie-talking to each other, would trigger the syntax, and all of a sudden, Chris, we were looking at like a horn sound would just kind of pop out of nowhere, and we'd all look at Chris, and his hands were free. It wasn't like he was playing it, but we were all going, "What the?"
I know. It made me look like an idiot. It's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm not doing anything.
That's when they discovered, I think, nu metal and something else that they probably put inside the syntax to stop the radio frequencies from triggering it. But it was kind of funny. It was either the very lights or the concussion bomb triggers or whatever did it. But poor Chris was standing there like,
actually, the pyro, the pyro caused the Synclavier itself to cause problems.
That's right.
It wasn't the syntax. This was a different problem altogether because we had Kiss's pyro guys. So we had serious, explosions and stuff. And they were very close to me on the edge of the stage.
Right.
And during the show, sometimes in a very specific spot, it was actually in Thriller, right in the beginning, da, da, and the Synclavier would just stop. Sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, wow, I have to reboot it, but by then we're playing it. So I had to then all of a sudden have to actually manually play the sequences that were going on, during the song.
What did you use to play the sequence? And it couldn't be the Synclavier, right, if it's still booting up. What would you use to play?
No, it would boot up quick, but it's no longer in sync.
Oh, got it. All right.
So I just manually play the parts.
I had to manually play the parts, mostly percussion parts. The groove. There's groove stuff going on, and Vincent Price, and footsteps and weird stuff. I had to play all of it, by hand. I remember the first time that happened. I went, "Whoa, okay, I'm on stage and I got to do this. This was never rehearsed." But we figured out what it was finally, and it was the explosions. It was a EM pulse that would just the one. I played two Synclaviers, but it would only affect one, and it was always in that song. And so we experimented. We told the pyro guys to make it a little less explosion.
Yeah.
And when they did that, it would work. And then they kept pushing it to the limit because they wanted it as big as they could get it. And then they'd go over the edge, and the Synclavier would stop. So we found that one spot where they could get away with it that wouldn't affect the Synclavier. But it took a lot of trial and error and panic modes. The whole band would look at me after the explosion to see if it's working or not.
So you're telling us in our last live chat with you that besides yourselves, there were others who could trigger the Synclavier. Who were these people, and what were they triggering?
Oh, no one else triggered the Synclavier. We were just talking about how some of the artifacts of radio frequencies or the concussion would mess with the Synclavier at the time. But no one.
It would freeze it up. So
yeah, I realized that.
Would be gone because we couldn't block it up after the fact.
Yeah.
The band's already playing.
I was just referring to Chris's and my previous live stream where you did say some other people could trigger it. So maybe you weren't talking about human beings, you were talking about other entities.
Actually, there was one time where Greg played it.
Oh,
okay.
that's right. That's right.
Right.
It was a specific part, and I don't know what the situation was. He couldn't do it with his sounds because I think they were programmed a certain way, and he had to play those, and so he couldn't. But it was an opening part, so it was very important. So, I know what it was. I played his parts.
Yes, it was the opening of Thriller, the piano part, because Greg, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I guess we're 34 years past our thing.
Right.
But so when Michael would disappear before Thriller, he would disappear, and when he'd come out on stage, it wasn't Michael; it was actually Greg.
Yep.
And so Greg needed time to change to get up to his rig.
That's right.
So Chris started the sequence that Greg put in for the sort of first intro of Thriller.
It was a big keyboard part. It was really important. He'd come out of bone, but couldn't make it in time.
So he put it in with Chris's system so that he could run up on stage, and as soon as he came up on stage, Greg took over his rig.
He would just give me a cue, and I'd turn it off, and he would just take over. I mean, that's the kind of precision with things we were doing all the time. Weird stuff like that. It worked perfectly.
Yeah, we had to improvise a lot because Michael would make, like I said, as the tour evolved, by the time we got to Pensacola, we were supposed to rehearse in LA.
Yeah.
And we had this great meeting with Frank DiLeo. So in our contracts, it was stated that if we left the environs of LA, that everyone would get paid full road pay. Except that in Los Angeles, we had the Forum, the Long Beach Arena. There was another big facility in Fresno and up in Oakland, and they were all booked. So we had to go to Pensacola, Florida, to the Civic Center arena. And I remember Frank, I won't say it was, but I was in the reception area of his office. One of the other guys was in Frank's office saying, well, I want my pay. And Frank said, well, have a nice tour, have a nice life. We'll replace you. And then it calmed down, and all of a sudden it was like, well, yes, Mr. Leo, of course I'll do the tour. So basically what they were saying is, look, we didn't plan on going out. We're not paying full road because it's cost out of pocket because you're not making money for these next 3 weeks. So we had to revamp the entire show. Like really, we detailed it. Even with we got rid of all the Jackson songs that were in there, except for Heartbreak Hotel stayed in the set because it was such a great build-up piece. And we had big horn sounds. We had all kinds of stuff going on. And Jennifer had a big solo in there. And it was just, like Mike thought about production as well. So, but the show got big. It went from, we did a few songs in the beginning parts of the tour. The Jackson songs we all knew, so it was familiar. But now we all had to learn, all of us, all the parts to Dirty Diana, Smooth Criminal, The Way You Make Me Feel, and so on. And so, even Human Nature, which wasn't on the Bad album, we wanted to fine tune and detail all the synth parts that Steve Porcaro did for that record. And so we really kind of fine-tuned the whole show in Pensacola. And that's when, Chris would stay extra late. That's when he was compressing more vocals and doing all these things to get the parts and sound effects right in there. And I was reprogramming my stuff. And Eddie Reynolds, who was my tech, he had left for Compact Computers. And he brought on this new guy named Peter Wiltz, who was a great, great guy. So we had a team, and by the way, the crew's really important. Chris and I, we couldn't do this by ourselves. We could have if you gave us a year, but we had a crew who understood what we needed to do. So they're making snakes and cables of just harnesses of cables for us. We knew what we needed to do, but we needed them to get the stuff done. And when we were programming, they were backing up all our files, and they were doing everything to help save us time so we could get a little bit of sleep. But we usually didn't, during those first few days. We were kind of all hands on deck, for, a lot of 24-hour days. Then we had, I think, Mary Hart. She was a host for Entertainment Tonight. And I remember she came to the rehearsals. And it was this amazing day. Michael's walking in with her, and we see all the cameras and lights on them. She's walking to the arena. And Michael wants us to play a song for Entertainment Tonight. So I think we did start in something for them. It was something that he didn't want to give away the new album yet, I think. So, I was watching some other footage of Michael's other tours. And one thing I can say about the Bad Tour, unashamedly, Michael never had to tell anybody how to play their parts on the Bad Tour. And part of that is because Chris knew what was done on the record. Greg was the musical director and played on all 3 albums and knew the material cold. And we worked everything out before Michael even walked into the studio. We really worked out. Greg drilled us. There's one song I wish we had done, and it was my favorite moment, even though it wasn't as far as in production. While we were in LA and we were programming our synths before we went to Pensacola, because we were getting all the new sounds put in, we had the idea as a band to do Speed Demon, which was one of my favorite songs on the record. And because musically it challenged us, and just the horns and bass parts in that were 30-second notes. They weren't in the horns. It wasn't like, it wasn't an easy song at all to do, if you think about it. I know there were some tricks in the studio and so on, but we wanted to do it. So we went to Leeds rehearsal. We got the whole band there, because I had Donny Osmond come in that day to see us rehearse this song. And we did this, we started at half speed. And so we drilled it for about an hour at half speed, because the muscle dexterity to play these 30-second notes, for me, wasn't easy. I know, other guys in the band were much more achieved than I was at this stuff, but Greg could do it with one hand. I had to really sit and learn this. We worked it up into about 45 minutes an hour, and Chris had the framework on the Synclavier. And we finally got it to speed, and it was so amazing. I mean, I lit up when we played this song, because it was just breathtaking how the band was so together to pull this off. And then we brought it to Michael, and with Michael, it was, well, how am I going to present it? It was a video that was a hit, but it was with a animated rabbit in cartoons. And so there wasn't a way for us to present it live. And so we wound up not doing that song, but the band was amazing, and it was a dedication to Michael, to Greg, and everybody knowing their place, and so.
So speaking of pieces,
what's interesting is that, how long has it been? It's been over 30 years since we, did this stuff. So things remain a little hazy, but I recall that we did Speed Demon in Pensacola. We rehearsed it there.
Yeah, see, well, we did play it. We learned it and played it in Leeds right before we broke down and went there. But we did play it and present it to Michael in Pensacola. Yeah. Because we wanted to blow him away. Yep. Which we kind of did.
We did. And we played Smooth Criminal, Speed Demon, and maybe another tune. But then after we did that, Michael called me directly into his dressing room. Yee. Right after that. I mean, immediately. We put our equipment down, and he called me in. And he said that, what was it? Oh, I think this is his exact words, I think. He says, Smooth Criminal sounds great. It sounds better than the record. We got to go in and record it again, remix it again. And we already remixed it twice. And I was like, oh no. But he was blown away with it. And then Speed Demon came up, and he admitted it sounded really good. But he told me he had nothing worked out for it. And I said, yeah, but it's so good, work something out. I told him directly, I said, work something, just do some dancing, anything, because it sounds great. And he was like, I don't know what to do. Because it was a claymation animation video. Right. So I think he was still in that mindset, you know, of trying to do something that would resemble that, which we couldn't do at the time. But yeah, he was definitely knocked out with our performance there at Pensacola, you know, when Mary Hart and him walked in.
Wow. So Michael, from what I understand, was very particular and meticulous about his creations. So when he brought that on stage, did he somewhat replicate the feel and the look of each song/music video then? Was that what made it so difficult or so awkward for him to translate the music video Speed Demon onto stage?
Not necessarily. I mean, each song was different. You know, he would do different things, right? But Speed Demon, that was entirely a claymation animation. It was no real people doing anything in that. So I don't know. I guess he just had a mindset that would be very difficult to pull off the way he envisioned it. Other stuff, you know, you saw, you know, it's pretty standard stuff, you know. I mean, we did Thriller, and he did all the changes and all the masks and, you know, like mimicking the video. So, but he didn't really say to me specifically why, other than why not Speed Demon. He just said he didn't have anything worked out for it. He just didn't know what to do. And so that was that.
Chris, you had 2 Fairlights and your synths. How long was your longest MIDI cable? Assuming your cable...
I had Synclavier.
I mean, what did I say?
Fairlights.
I'm sorry. I was looking at my notes and it had Fairlight on it. I'm sorry. Apologies. 2 Synclaviers and your synth X. No, oh no, I'm not going to be able to lift this down now.
That's okay.
How long was your longest MIDI cable? Were you connected via the cable or?
Yeah, I don't know, 40 feet maybe, the maximum.
Did you ever trip on it, pull it out, or anything like that?
No.
Wow.
No. Everything, all our moves were, you know, perfected. How I would walk out, you know, around the keyboards to come out front, you know, and Mitch was really good with us, my tech, you know, because sometimes I would play keyboards, and the switch between the syntax and the keyboards had to be, you know, literally instantaneous. So on the syntax, the strap was built into my clothes.
Oh.
So all I had to do was grab it like this, and it would unlock.
Oh.
And I would just go like this with the syntax, and he would just be there and take it. And my hands would be on the keyboard immediately. And then vice versa. I would just step back, and he'd be there, boom, and I just click, you know. And
Nice.
it was like that. So all our moves were rehearsed. So we keep things like tripping on chords at a minimum.
Your MIDI cables weren't built as well, were they? Weren't custom built as well, were they? Because Rory, you mentioned. Okay.
No, most of it was junk, but we had to do with what we had.
Okay.
I mean, we got a lot of basic high-end MIDI cables, like for Greg's rig and my rig. We didn't have time to do everything with a lab guy to build everything from scratch, but we did have snakes built from where our keyboards were down to the main racks. And so we had store-bought MIDI cables, but they were high-end ones that went down to a state junction box.
Okay.
And from there, these snakes were 42 pair snakes that took the audio and the MIDI down to our racks.
Right.
And so that was the work. But, you know, the other thing, too, which was fun, yesterday I had Mr. Phillingaines says hello to you, Chris.
Ah.
And I had a date with Greg yesterday. We were interviewed for a documentary on an old friend of mine, Nicky Hopkins, who was Nicky was the Greg Phillingaines of his generation. He played on everything from the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Beatles, John Lennon,
Jeff
Bee
Beck.
Gees, or like that was Nicky Hopkins. As Greg is that guy from the late 70s, forward. And so Greg was over, and we were talking about the detail that Michael, he heard everything. There wasn't a thing on stage that happened that he didn't take note of or he wasn't aware of. And one night we were laughing about this because you'll probably remember this, and it's a funny story for me and a scary one. I thought I was going to get fired that night. We were in Würzburg, Germany, and it was one of these shows where Michael was in full energy, like the universe aligned with Michael this day, where there wasn't a care in the world and he was going to have the time of his life. So when he was dancing, he'd even ran up the sound tower past Chris, where the tower would hold the speakers up to face the audience, and he'd come down it again and do his dance and all this. I just thought, wow, this guy's on it tonight. We start Billie Jean, and it starts with this floodlight that comes down on Michael with the fedora down and his black jackets gleaming, and Ricky starts the drums, and everyone knows it's Billie Jean coming. So we're into the song, and Michael had a routine. He would do the moonwalk, and then he would do it in circles and so on. But this one night, I'm playing, and on the Fairlight, I had these voice sounds that do the do. I'm doing that part, and Greg's doing all the strings, and all the other parts and roads, and so my part was solid through the whole song. Like I couldn't. It's just you play it. It's just it was the anchor of the thing. Anyways, I'm watching Michael, and he's facing the audience, and with my keyboard on top, I had two keyboards. There were actually three. There was a Fairlight one at the bottom, my main 88 note controller, my KX80 Yamaha, and then I had a KX76 Yamaha, which I did more of the horn stuff because it was not a weighted keyboard. But that was high enough where I can only see from Michael's knees up. I couldn't see his feet. I could only see his knees from where I was on up. He's facing the audience, and all of a sudden he's going sideways. And I mean no movement from the knees up. And I'm thinking, that's impossible. So I reach over my keyboard to see what's going on. I thought the road crew literally built in a conveyor belt for Michael to do this, to freak the audience out. And maybe us too. But I thought there was a conveyor belt there, and I was not kidding when I said that. And I said it right after the show, because I went, how did he do that? And I'm looking to see if there was a panel that came up and then went down from the stage, and smooth as could be. And I'm like, so in doing so and reaching over the keyboard, I lost my place in the song. And I'm out 2 bars, and I looked over at Greg, and he's like, 4, and I'm back in. And I was embarrassed, and I was like, oh no, I'm fired, and I thought I was just going to get reprimanded. And I got called by Michael later and said, what happened? And I could have blamed the Fairlight, I could have blamed a cable, a road crew, a this, a that. But it was so powerful to me to see a guy actually pull that off and entertain. And he would, Chris will tell you, he would have practiced dancing 13 hours a day. This wasn't like an easy thing. He worked at it, and so he told me he'd been working on this for a while, but I got embarrassed. I told him I screwed up. I had to see if there was a conveyor belt in front of me, and I leaned over the keyboards and I lost my place. His laugh was so infectious. He was laughing so hard. And of course I was relieved. I thought, I was just waiting to, like for Frank saying, Rory, you're out of here. We're bringing so-and-so in. And I said, Michael, it'll never happen again, I promise. And he goes, no, it's funny. And I thought, I'm glad he thought it was funny, but it was like the most amazing show I'd ever seen Michael do. From there on out, he did that. He continued that. But it was the first time I saw it. but his ears, he heard anything that went down on stage, any beat or a part or anything. He took mental note of everything and let us know, hey, if you do this, make sure this doesn't happen today, or do more of that, or you know, Jennifer, come out further, you know, because I want to do this with you while you're playing. And I mean, he was really that good, you know.
So, Rory, speaking of equipment, thanks for that anecdote. I noticed somewhere that you guys, someone had an Akai sampler as well. Was it an S900, or were there several samplers on top of the fact that you had your Synclavier and your Fairlight? You had samplers.
By the time we did the second leg of the tour, meaning from Pensacola rehearsals on out, the rest of the U.S. and Europe and back to Japan and U.S., just in case, because I saw what Chris went through with the Synclavier, and it was painful. So the sounds I needed, like I had the beginning of Beat It on the Fairlight, and I had a certain amount of strings that I used for She's Out of My Life that I had. And I wanted to replicate in case there was ever an emergency. If we couldn't get a part flown in on the Fairlight or something happened, I wanted to have a backup of some of the, like on, well, we got rid of the song, but You Are My Lovely, or You Are My Lovely One. There's a mechanical, Heartbreak Hotel. Okay. Heartbreak Hotel. There's a mechanical sound, just some big sort of compressor mechanical sound that, you know, as the chorus is going to da 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 da, there's a sound going doom shking, and it's this like mechanical thing. Well, that was on my Fairlight. So all these sounds and the voice sounds for Billie Jean, I wanted backed up on the S900. Even though it wouldn't sound as good, it was just an emergency. And I don't think we ever used it, but you know, it's like just ensuring, you know, you don't put up this multi-million-dollar show and go to play Beat It and look at everybody around the stage and go, sorry, you know, that just wasn't going to happen. So we had to build in our back. I mean, Chris had 2 Synclaviers. There's like $500,000 each Synclavier there, you know. It was not a cheap endeavor to put the show together.
So what other synth modules were you MIDI up to with your 2 Yamaha controllers?
You had a monstrous wall of gear, man.
Yeah, I had what they called the Sub-Zero, and it was a double bay rack about 6 feet tall.
Ooh.
And I had different things in mind. So I had, for my horns, I had a combination. I used Roland MKS-80 for an analog horn sound. I had a Roland D550 that had more of a real sample of like a horn sound in it. I used the module from my Yamaha 816s, which sounded a little bit like the spit of an aperture, like when you first blow into it, it has that sort of raspy thing. All of that went into a Lexicon PCM 70 that I had on gated chamber. I think it was 2.0 software, gated chamber. And then I had the Yamaha Rev 5 with just a little bit of pitch change C with a slight touch of chorusing. So that was my basic horn thing. My strings were coming from the MKS 70 and Fairlight together. And then I had an MKS 20, which was my piano at the time. There are far better, more piano things out now. But at the time, that's what we had. So we had the MKS 20, but I built it up when I was with Chick. I had work on the 816s, which was like having 8 DX7s in a rack module. And with Chick, we built up these Rhodes sounds that were detuned. They had different sort of timbres. But when you hit it, like at the end of Man in the Mirror, where Greg goes, where just the bass part goes bum 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 bum, and that low note with the 816s underneath gave that rumble kind of big sound. So I put the 816s under the piano, like I tucked it under, so that you heard the piano natural sound, but really what you were hearing is the body of the 816s doing the pianos. So you can hear it with Greg's rig and my rig. I had a rack mount mini Moog and a Prophet VS.
Wow.
For sounds, because I would use Human Nature, I'd use a Prophet VS, the D50 Fantasia. It became like every TV commercial later used it. It seemed like in the 80s, the D50 did like about 1 million commercials because the sounds are great. But so I rarely, like Chris, I rarely use factory sounds. In fact, when I got the Roland gear, Eric Persing, who at that time, he now is the head of Spectrasonics, but he worked for Roland. And I needed two things. I wanted my horn sound to be a big analog sound off that thing, and the factory one wasn't cutting it. So we worked together and came up with the horn for the MKS-80. Also, the beginning of Beat It, the whistle, after I hit the opening gong sound type thing, which was originally done on a Synclavier, by the way. It wasn't done on the Fairlight, but I sampled it on the Fairlight because it just made it easy. It was just there. And it was a dual 8-bit processor, so it was a grainy sound. It just sounded great, kind of grainy instead of, because the Synclavier was 100K mono sampling, and it was better than, to this day, that Synclavier samples better than anything on the market, period. It's just they were military A to D converter. But the Fairlight had this dual 8-bit processor, but when you got a sound in there, and Peter Gabriel made it kind of famous, but it had this great warmth to it. So when I put Beat It in there, my friend Will Alexander at Fairlight helped me do this. And we just went, wow, it's great. So that went from the victory tour to the bad tour, but it worked, you know. And so there's just certain instruments, you know, that just worked really well. So there was a Prophet VS, the 816s, the MKS 20, 70, 80, the programmer for the MKS 80. I'm trying to think, and then I had a whole rack of effects. And Akai made a digital patch bay. That's where my nickname on the tour became Patch Bay, because, and it's Don Boyette gave me that name, I think, and it was because I had this. It was taller than 6 feet. It was this big, tall, carpeted gray road case, but it had a digital patch bay because, like on Smooth Criminal, when I was the horns, and if you listen to the album, I listened to the breakdown of the album the other day. So when the band was, when Michael wasn't singing, the horns would go da 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 da. So the first time it does that, there's delays on it. So it'll go da 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 da. So I had to go really fast to turn on and off the delays, and I couldn't do it with my hand. I couldn't rely on a hand road guide to do it because so I got the digital patch bay to put in and out the effects when I changed MIDI channels on the keyboard controller. So, like Chris said, you know, we had to sort of improvise and figure out these tricks to get us through this, and it was, some of it was uncharted territory. You know, I mean,
you remember we were in. I think we were. I think we're for sure we were in London playing, and in the afternoon, one of the days, I think it was Ricky who set this up, but Phil Collins came backstage to check out our gear. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was me, you, Greg, and Ricky and Phil Collins, and we started on the opposite side of the stage, you know, and worked towards our side of the stage, and he was just checking out our stuff, and he was just completely freaked out. He said, I remember he said, "Do you use all this stuff?" And we said, "Yeah, every bit of it."
You know, the similar thing. We were at Madison Square Gardens for United Negro College Fund fundraiser event. In fact, it was when we were there. It was during the Grammys too. The Grammys happened, but we were there for the. We had a couple of days in New York because we played Madison Square Gardens. And after the show was over, I saw Jimmy Jam walking the floor from the backstage area, and I went, and Jimmy and Terry I idolize these guys too, and so I see Jimmy and I said, I didn't know his legal last name, so I said, Mr. Jam. I didn't know what to say, and so he was really nice, and he came over and I said, did you want to see the gear? And I brought him up on stage and showed him everything, and he just like, wow, because there was never rigs built like this. I mean, even in this day, and it's funny because I still love the analog stuff. It still sounds better than anything I've heard, except I have to admit, I went to a Toto concert about 3 years ago, and Steve Porcaro had joined the band again. And Steve was the sort of genius behind all the synth programming at Toto. And I'm listening to all the sounds and the horns and Rosanna and all these great sounds. And I talked to Steve afterwards. He had 2 controller keyboards, a Mac, and an A-to-D converter. I think it was an Apogee Rosetta. He was doing everything from plugins. Mm. And I was like, I'm sorry. It sounded too good. I work with plugins with other artists and stuff, and they don't have that thing that I really like. Mm. Nothing replaces a mini mode. When you're really moving actual electronic energy, there's a difference, Synclav was a different animal. It was a hybrid. It was just like, because I bought one after Michael's tour, and I was in love with it. I couldn't afford to keep it going, but I think Kitaro bought mine. But it was the most ridiculous sounding instrument I ever owned, and it was like if I still had that, I'd be in heaven, But the gear on that tour, and I can't remember, and we all had spares too, by the way. There were backups for all of this stuff. So.
Yeah, I played 2 Synclaviers on stage, and which meant 2 keyboards, 2 monitor terminals. There was a direct-to-disc recording system, there was synthesizers, sampling system, and all these were in racks with tons of drives off the stage in an air-conditioned room. Mm. And then we had a backup of that. So if anything went down, we had backups of the drives, so you could just shove them in real quick and boot them up real quick. And I had a whole system in my hotel room.
Oh, yeah.
Which is ridiculous, usually I had 2 rooms, adjoining rooms. In one room, they just take out all the furniture and put in this whole system. And the idea behind that primarily was if Michael wanted to work on songs and some ideas, he could just come there and we would just work like we normally do. Although that never turned out to be the case. It just turned out to be my system that I could play with while, between gigs. But because Michael was always playing, and goofing off. So the things we were doing at the time, and I think even today, it'd never been done before. We had so much gear and such a sophisticated setup, and how it was all integrated. It was quite amazing. I don't think it would have been very easy to just pull one of us out and replace us.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. Yeah.
So.
No, yes. We even in the band jam that I was talking about earlier, when Michael would take a reprieve for a minute.
Yeah.
I didn't have any solos. I don't like soloing to solo. I don't want, hey, look at me. I don't like that. So when we all did solos, there was a reason for it. But what I thought was, we didn't play "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough," and I love that song, and it was such a great signature song of Michael's. And so Greg, I had an Akai MPC 60. Ricky and I got a couple of the first ones built. That one, and so. I had it in my hotel room, and Greg came over and put in the parts that he actually played on the album.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh man, let me play the melody of "Don't Stop" on. I'll do it on the D50. I'll just come up with the sound, and we'll do this.
Yeah.
So when it came to my turn, I'd have my Pete would hit start on the Synclavier. It would play one of the 816 racks. I had 2 of them. One was set up for the sequence, one was for my main keys. But he would play that, and then I would play along with it, and the band would kick in, and just, we'd do like a verse, a chorus, a solo, and then I was out. And it was just, when I think now, if I look back, all that gear, like, God, I wish I had all that stuff. but it was like, because to my right would be the back of Chris's Synclavier. So there'd be two Synclaviers, his CRT monitors. I see someone wrote down here, big CRT monitors on your chat. But yeah, so he had his green CRT monitors there and his alphanumeric keyboard. And I had my Fairlight underneath one of my keyboards, and then my monitor was next to me to that, another CRT. Greg had a sister system to mine. He had a single rack, but it was packed with everything needed. But he had a few more keyboards than I did. Like I didn't use the Korg DW8000, which he used. I had a DX7 II with the floppy disk that I would do on Smooth Criminal. I would double Chris's parts, the chimp, we call them chimp screams. Da 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 da. So I would double those with the DX7, and also I would do Rock With You on I would do that on the DX7. But Greg had, if I recall, he had the controllers, the same things, but he also had the DW, a DX7, and it was something else. And so when you just walk on stage, like Chris was saying, when you brought Phil Collins or Jam came up, even Lionel Richie, when he came to our rehearsals in LA, when we were at Universal, I remember him seeing our gear, just looking and shaking his head. So the Synclaviers usually topped it. By the time they got to Chris's side, they were like, yeah, it's Michael Jackson.
Well, one can't deny.
They couldn't deal with it.
My brain is still up in cloud 11, if that's such a thing. But yeah, one can't deny that the sound of the 80s was something beyond special. Why do you think, there is a cult following for the sound of the 80s because of all that you just said? Or is there something else to it? Why is it that we continue to reminisce and hold on to the 80s? Why does the 80s sound keep on coming back?
Think about this, just as a philosophical look. Great music is great music, okay? You can go to the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Great music is great music. There were songwriters that were sitting in their rooms working 80 hours a day, carving out a song, working on something. There were producers like Quincy, Jimmy Jam, Phil Ramone, Al Schmidt. The list goes on of just guys who crafted what they did. You also got musicians in a studio together. So in the case with Chris working with these guys, you had JR, you had Greg, you had, Nathan East or whoever is playing bass, and you had Steve Lukather or David Williams, and so and that doesn't, not just Michael's music, but look at Depeche Mode, look at their albums from back then, and all Kaja Gugu and all these other bands, Duran Duran and George Michael. I mean, just think of all the artists that came out in Whitney Houston that came out in that era. Everyone had their own sound. Everyone was identifiable. All their songs were hits. I was just thinking today, because Chris and I remember we were together when we heard this announcement, and we both said, I remember this moment with Chris because it was kind of a funny musical thing, unfortunately at the expense of the artist. Terence Trent D'Arby had just come out, and it was really good. He had a song called Wishing Well, I think. And we were hearing him in England. We were hearing him on the radio, or we get on a bus, we'd hear him. And our background, the singers would always sing along with these great songs on the radio. And Terence Trent D'Arby came up, and he was like an amazing artist. He had his own sound. I was like, wow. And we were pulling up to Wembley, and it was on the BBC on the radio on the bus that said, Terence Trent D'Arby today said that he was going to be the biggest artist ever and be bigger than Michael Jackson. And I remember looking over at Chris, we just went, there goes his career. and it was sad because he was so good, but Michael at that time, and this is another part of what, Chris will share this with you, but there wasn't a backstage where in Japan, Gregory Peck came to our show. Sophia Loren came to our show. Elizabeth Taylor was at our shows. Marlon Brando was at our shows. Gina Lollobrigida was there. Sean Connery, Pavarotti.
Robin Williams.
Yeah, yep. Robin Williams, Dustin Hoffman. The one who did all the great disco, Donna Summer. Yeah, Robin Williams was joking around with our security guards, and that in itself should have been a TV show. But every show there was someone, And one of my favorite moments, I was telling Jimmy and Terry about it, because I when I met Terry Lewis backstage, he was so quiet, I was intimidated. I didn't want to go near him. But Prince had come to the show, and his management asked our team, if you see Prince in the hallway, don't look him in the eye, just walk past him, don't engage. Well, when you hear the star act, you kind of go, okay, I can't wait to see Prince. And so I remember all of us walking back, from our wardrobe stuff, and Prince came walking back. I think he was with Kat and maybe Shueh-li Ong. I can't remember who he was with, but the two girls with him.
Shueh-li Ong.
I just remember going, "Hi, Prince." And he looked up and smiled. And I have a feeling his management got really upset with me, but it was and he smiled and he was really happy. And it was really cool. And I told this to Jimmy and Terry later. He goes, he wasn't that guy. He really was a good guy. But we would be in this environment where every night there was someone that we all looked up to, and we'd meet them. Princess Di and Charles came backstage to our show, and I think Michael presented them with a check for her foundation, for Princess Diana's foundation. So, but yeah, that tour will never be replicated.
Chris, sorry, Rory.
I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I wanted to know what Chris thought of the music of the 80s, or at least the era of the sound of the 80s. Why do you think it has such following? I call it cult following. Even the younger generation, they weren't born during the 80s, but somehow there's love for the sound of the 80s. What do you think it is?
Well, Rory touched on it, but I think it was a certain time period with certain elements from different things that all came together at the same time. Like there was synthesizers were just starting to become practical and sounding good, with analog synthesizers, and there were polyphonic things were coming out, so there was these new tools. At the same time, the music industry was really in a really good place. Like Rory said, there was a lot of hits, and the artists were being creative. This is before corporate came in and just made it into a cookie cutter, And so you had live musicians that had more freedom, and they were more innovative. They weren't having to follow any particular rules, and all these new instruments came up at the same time. So they kind of all fused together, and created this thing that we, view as 80s music. It was kind of unique. How synthesizers were incorporated into, pop and rock, and even started to get into some heavy stuff. It was, look at Hall & Oates' music. That's a good example of how, great tunes and live performances mixed with really good synthesizer sounds and production of the time. Great tunes, man. So I think it's a combination that happened at that point in time. It's kind of like the Beatles happened at a certain time. Those things happen, and they just resonate and expand and blow up into something really unique. It would be nice to see something like that happen now. Yeah.
I do have some questions about now. Speaking of tools, and as we edge towards the end of this live stream, we might have to get you back for another round. There's so much to talk about. But so tools, and I've got a few questions about technology. I'll ask one and then the next. I'll start with Chris first and then I'll go to Rory. So the understanding that the cost of MIDI controllers these days, makes it affordable for every household to have one or more. I think you could probably, if you only had a few $100s, you could buy yourself a decent MIDI controller. And if you have a laptop or a computer even, or an iOS device, you could make music. I wouldn't say play, I would say make music. And then you have the newest herd of expressive instruments which extend the already what I call ludicrous performance opportunities that MIDI allows. And this herd is known as the MPE, the MIDI polyphonic expressive instrument, which enables you to play polyphonically, just like acoustic instruments, all the sound parameters polyphonically, again, I repeat. So do you have any thoughts about these MPE controllers or the state of MIDI controllers right now? An example of an MPE controller is the Haken Continuum, the Roly Seaboard. Chris?
Yeah, I was going to just mention that. You mentioned it,
Oh.
These are really good controllers that allow really good expression and uses, really newer technologies so that you can get this expression. But then again, you have to practice. What a concept. You have to practice your instrument and to really take advantage of it. But these days, that kind of expression, and if you program the synthesizer properly, right? They have to go hand in hand. If the controller isn't programmed properly, it's not going to equate to the, to the sensitivity that you want to express on the synthesizer. And at the same time, if the sound is not cooperating with your expressions, same thing. So you have to have both. You have to really program it properly and learn the controller. For me, I'm always experimenting with different controllers here in my studio. It's interesting, though, if I had to break it down for the music that I've been doing, I use the Push 2 a lot because I use Ableton a lot. And the pads are really quite sensitive, so I can do quite a good performances on the pads. And also on my iPad, I can do a lot of really cool things expression-wise because it knows where all your fingers are, And that's affordable for a lot of people. You can because you got your synthesizers in there, and you've got a really good control surface in there. So if you want to talk about something that's kind of compact and control, where you have your sound sources and expression controllers and so on and so forth, and sequencing and all these things that you want to do, recording, you can do it all in the box, of an iPad, to a certain degree. Even in my live performances here in Japan, I use the iPad for a control surface, because it's very expressive. And I use the Zetar, which is my more modern version of the syntax that I was using in the days, and that's very expressive. So there's a lot of controllers these days, but the Push 2 is very cool because it can do a lot of things. I don't really have to use the mouse and keypad very much anymore with that. And I have control surfaces, for just recording, controlling my workstation. I'm using a lot of ProSonus stuff for that. So my studio, which I'm looking at right now, because that's where I am, it doesn't look like a traditional studio with a big console, although I do have a 64 channel sitting right next to me. But it's all control surfaces.
Yeah.
I have a machine jam. I have the Push. I have a ProSonus, and I have a Native Instruments 88 keyboard. On the other side over here, I have like 2 or 3 Zetars behind me. So I just switch to whatever I need, whatever has what requires the expression for the part at the time. I can access those things. But I would like a Hawken.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I really would, but they're so expensive.
We had the inventor Leopold Haken and Edmund Egan as well, who created the sound engine on. I think it was in season 2, maybe early season 2, talking about it. So yes, it's quite an interesting instrument. But I think I might hold on off from getting one for a while because what I have already takes up so much time. There's so really with one instrument, there's so much exploration you can continue to do, isn't there? It never really stops. You're always discovering something else that you can do with
I
it.
know. And then there's my guitar. I still practice at least 4 hours a day,
Yeah.
at least, every day, because to keep the chops going.
Absolutely.
But I don't sleep much.
Oh, okay.
So I get away with stuff more than maybe others. I don't know.
Thanks, Chris. I do have one more question to end it all, but I want to give Rory a chance to respond to that question about.
I've gotten the opposite of Chris in that I, a year ago, and Sam, who came on earlier, Guy Laliberté, who founded Cirque du Soleil, he has an island off of Tahiti that he invited about 20 of us from around the world. We were flamenco guitarists, bass, different musicians, percussionists, Tina Gao, who was in some of the Cirque shows. And a lot of these people play for Hans Zimmer and so on. They're just great musicians. And we got to his island, and the whole point was to be there for a couple of weeks and record all this sort of DJ music and come up with stuff. And so to have a flamenco guitarist and all these great musicians that were involved, bagpipes, hurdy-gurdy. I mean, it was all organic stuff. And again, we're all in the studio now creating and having a ball. And they had a Moog 1 and a Mini Moog. And the Moog 1 is probably my favorite polyphonic synth I've seen in 30, 40 years. It's not like the Memory Moog from years ago. It's another animal on its own. I put the headphones on. I started trying to work with it. It was so deep. I just did the dive in, kind of like what Chris is talking about with his stuff. And I went, you know what? What was passionate about synthesizers to me, the Mini Moog being the first thing that I owned, and then the modular. Sam, who checked in on here earlier, said hello on your screen. He's got a big modular system up in Montreal, a big, beautiful Moog system. And a lot of these guys are still into that world. Euro racks are becoming a big thing now too. And for me, I'm getting more joy going back into analog discovery, like even with my Mini Moog and my Voyager, putting them together, getting a Moog 1 here soon. We had a Moog 15 on the island as well, and that's what I did Chick's first albums with. And so I started going back into that world, and there's this connection that I thought was lost. It would be like a long-lost lover that you rediscovered years later. And there's so much great new stuff, and there's so much emotional stuff. I mean, like expressional stuff for emotion that's out there now, like what Chris is saying, that much more sensitive than it was 30 years ago. But working with analog gear and finding a new sound that you never did before and diving back into it, now that we're older, a little wiser, and we understand the electronics more, I'm having more fun on that side of it now. And it's kind of like I've retrograded from marching forward with all the technology, because I started doing the mouse thing, and I just went, I'm not having fun, you know. And if the system crashed or you lost this, you lost that, it's like, it just became cumbersome to me, because like, it's just strange. I don't know how to explain it, but you get in the studio, I just want to go, okay, let's try something new. Instead of, here's my stock sounds on this keyboard that has all the PCM samples on it. I don't want to do that anymore. We all did that at some point in our lives. I kind of want to just go again from scratch and say, bass sound. I know I can get a killer bass sound on the Mini Moog, or I know I can do this. Or on the modular thing, I can put something together. This new, the Moog 1, it'll take me years to master that. So I like the challenge of taking the years to figure that out than to get, you know, to get one keyboard that's going to be my sort of everything. Because it's just, I got more time on my life now, I guess.
Thanks,
No,
Rory.
Rihanna's calling me to do a tour, so I have the time to do the homework now, and it's fun. It's
Yeah.
challenging. You know, Chris was doing surround sound. You know, right when I was starting to discover it. I wound up launching it later. You know, for doing that, which we talked about earlier. So, you know, great minds. I mean, we're always thinking technology, but we're just going down different paths. I'm kind of going back into an analog world. Chris has always been on cutting edge on the digital world. But it's what made that bad tour work, too, by the way.
Speaking of touring, I don't know if you've noticed, and you probably have because you're in the industry, but I've noticed that a lot of touring bands, or most touring, maybe I should say touring productions, use a lot of and rely on computers and iOS devices. Even country music acts from Nashville, I think, I'm not sure, I guess it's okay to mention the name because I read it in a magazine. It was Keith Urban, who had translated one of his albums onto stage by using iPads, a few
I
iPads.
saw his keyboard player has an instrument he built that's really kind of like an advanced version of like triggering samples and parts and stuff from that sort of technology, from my, you know, iOS operating systems. And I saw it, you know, and it was very impressive. You know, I mean, there's no judgment, there's no boundaries. If the song's great, it sounds great, and you've got some way of presenting it,
So
that's what it is.
do you think technology is in a way helping modify the musical genres as we know them?
Well, that's a good point to make, and I'll let Chris take it from there, because it's the devil's advocate here. So when Pro Tools became a standard, or became everybody in the universe could have a home recording studio, downfall of the music industry is everyone thought they were producers and songwriters and artists. So my pet peeve is that when there was an infrastructure of a record label, you had artist repertoire, A&R guys, really listen for the song and really listen to what was a hit and wasn't a hit. And you had the best producers and songwriters, you know. So to get signed and to get into that ballpark where you're that good, whether Eddie Van Halen or it's, you know, whoever it is, you couldn't be mediocre in the 70s and 80s and prior to that. It'd be really good. When everybody got the new technology and it was available to everybody, we were getting inundated with lots of mediocrity. Drop the bar. And so there are always going to be standout, incredible talents to show their heads. There's always going to be a generation that's going to give us the next. Dr. Dre did it for his generation. There's always going to be someone, you know. But at the same time, we're getting, everyone's kind of, you know, I'll send you a drum track, you send me your guitar part, you blah, blah, blah. And again, we've taken that spiritual element of putting everybody in the room together and creating. And we're now sharing files, and, you know, I'll do this keyboard part, you do the drums, send it back to me, and I'll put this part on. And it loses a dynamic. And so technology is great. It's helped. I mean, if you're doing a record and you capture everybody in the studio, I don't have to rewind the tape, and I can edit, and I can do this and that right now. It's fantastic. But it's also crippled our industry too, to a certain degree, because it makes you lazy. And what was good about that era that Chris and I were talking about, you couldn't be lazy in a studio, and you couldn't be mediocre, and you couldn't be average. You know, you had to push your limits to be good enough to be in a room with Michael, or to do whatever it was. I mean, you know, I don't know how else to say it, and I don't mean to put down musicians who, you know, who've made a living at doing, you know, beats and getting on the radio, and they're making hits and millions of dollars. I'm not challenging their value, but there is a creative value to doing things the right way, and I think technology's shortcuts have undercut some of that magic.
I have to agree with you on that as well. Chris, any thoughts from your side?
This is an interesting subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is I totally agree with Rory. There's no question about it. I think the magic of creativity, first of all, it really has no boundaries or rules. So you can do whatever you want, bottom line. But then there's areas that resonate with what you like doing. But I personally, out of the experience that I've had in my lifetime with doing music and interacting with real musicians, meaning people who know how to play their instrument,
Yeah.
that kind of musicianship is getting lost, I think. Although there are some amazing players these days, but they just play by themselves on YouTube.
Yeah.
You know, the magic comes with the intercommunication of performing together, because I view music as communication. But how, just sitting there with a computer and pushing a button and making beats, how much communication is really going on there, this interaction, because there's a magic that happens there, and the younger generation is missing that. I think if they could feel that for just a short time, it would change their approach. But then again, I see technology to me is just a tool. It's how you use it.
Yeah.
Right? You can use it for really cool things or not. And this applies to beyond music. So it's really not the tools, it's who uses them and how you use them.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, I think, that the younger generation in general is missing out on the interactivity, that happen, and that magic. I really liked that. But at the same time, I'm a techno head. So I'm kind of unusual. I like to combine both, together to fuse a really magical experience. But and how you do that is a whole interesting breakdown in itself that could take, would be a subject for more discussions, which would be very interesting. But
we could sit over dinner.
Yeah. But I totally agree with Rory. I mean, we've come up with and worked with the same type of musicians, that are real musicians that know how to seriously play and interact together. Yeah. But I did notice in the past, a lot of those musicians would shut out technology, mostly because it was just overwhelming and too new, and they couldn't really understand it. It's mostly a misunderstanding, I think, than anything else. And then you have the newer people that think, technology is it, and, these other musicians are old folks and they don't know what's going on anymore. And there's a truism on both sides, but like I said in the beginning, creativity doesn't have any rules. You can do whatever you want, and I love listening to all kinds of different music. But I think that there should be this fusion of real playing where you really know how to perform your instrument, and technology and the interaction.
Yeah, I agree.
But I got to tell you something. The other day, I pulled out an album, and I put it on my turntable, and I sat and listened, and it was off the wall. And I just sat there and enjoyed this music so much. It was so simple. Like nothing. Here's the turntable, here's the LP, put it on. I listened to the whole album, and it just gave me those feelings why I love music so much. Because the Off the Wall album kind of gravitates to everything that I loved about music, which was a great song, Michael's performance, the musicianship on the record, the production. Like Quincy had a way of presenting the whole picture. And that's the magic that I miss, And a lot of previous producers, even back to the 60s, that if it wasn't Jefferson Airplane or Bob Dylan or the Beatles or Led Zeppelin, whatever it was, their albums and which is the other thing, is they put an album out. And an album gave you a portrait of what they were thinking or what they were saying, and Crosby, Stills and Nash politically, whatever it was. Now you're getting one song, 99-cent song. You're getting one piece of what the communication is, one part of what they really want to tell you, or what the artist has in mind. And so we sort of stripped away, like Chris said, that communication, which is so valuable, which makes music work. And we kind of taken the tools away slowly but surely, And
there's an amazing function that goes on when musicians play together in a band and interact. I mean, if you try to analytically break that down, there is so much going on there that's mind-boggling, yet it works. And when it works, it comes across to the people as this amazing energy, and emotion. And just having machine play itself doesn't have that.
Yeah. Well, again, we were blessed. We got to work with a group of musicians and an artist that we'll take to our grave with us. We were very fortunate, and none of us have forgotten it. Yeah.
Thanks, Rory, Chris. I have to admit that I'm with both of you on everything that you've just spoken about on the issue of technology and its effect on music or music making these days. I guess it's not just these days, it's been happening for a while. But except that it's very much more rampant in our households these days. Everyone's got a computer. You can basically create a song if you wish from just having your laptop. You don't even need a MIDI controller of any kind. There are certain parameters that constrain for you pitch or rhythm, and away you go. I've had to teach recently, not that long ago. I use Logic Pro, by the way, so I went from just a track window to a grid window, because they've just introduced the grid window, for creating beat patterns and other things such as that. So now people realize that, or users of such DAWs realize they don't actually need to be able to put in individual notes. They can simply use the grid window, put in little cells of repeated items, and there you go. They have a song in half an hour, and they publish that, as you said, online. It's as quick and simple as that.
There's guys, I've seen Deadmau5, I was watching a video of Deadmau5 putting together a track, and he does it note by note with inputting MIDI data. But he figured out a way to make it musical and to make it cool, and he's into all the Euro synth rack stuff. And he figured it out. But not everybody's at that level yet. You know what I mean? And so, even with software and everything, like Akai has a new live MPC live. And Pat Leonard has been sending me some stuff he's doing on this. And I'm like, oh my God. Like there's guys who get it, but they still have to have the artistry in them to do it. And that's the spirit of the person themselves.
I hope we don't come to the point where we go to a concert and watch a band and it's about as interesting as, because they're using all these iOS devices and blah blah blah. It's about as interesting as watching them all check their email on stage.
I just had a thought when you mentioned that. You know how in the old days or in the 60s where we had people putting up tape machines, reel-to-reel machines on stage, and you're watching a music concrete type performance? Are we kind of going back that direction, just with different technology?
Well, I mean, I don't want to see a show like, I'll tell you why I love the Foo Fighters so much, is because they play their instruments and Dave writes great songs. And so you go see a Foo Fighters concert, you're getting real musicians on stage who've been in the studio for weeks and months working on new songs, and they're going out and they're kind of the last of that generation of bands really doing it right, And there's Queens of the Stone Age. There's a lot of other bands that are still doing it. Yeah. But, like Dave Grohl's a musicologist. He loves the history of music. He loves everything from Motown to Michael Jackson to the Stones to the whatever it is. He's a student of music. So he's still doing it that way. They're still playing their instruments and they're still selling out venues. But when I see a band where you're watching the singers and you're watching the artists, and everything's on Pro Tools.
Yeah.
All the parts are there on a computer, and the band's basically lip syncing 90% of the show, I'm not interested.
Yeah,
I'd,
that's
you know,
true.
I'd rather I'd be rather going through my monthly bills and watching that.
Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting, you know, because there's, you know, music, you know, it's so broad as far as what it can do with the human being emotionally and psychic wise and
Yeah.
physically. You know, the music does so many things on so many different levels. And it's like, I kind of look at it as like a water, the creativity of music being water, and it takes the form of the glass you put it in.
Yeah.
You know, it's so amazing like that. So that's why there really is no rules. But
Yeah.
but when you choose a specific area of communication that you want to do with your creativity, then that's when you need to be able to pull the tools that you need and the techniques that you need, whether it's a band, if you're playing together, or songwriting performed by a band, or to the single artist who just plays by himself, acoustic guitar or piano, or it could be a synthesizer. He's expressing his personal expression, you know, that doesn't have any interactivity. I mean, if you look at a painter, you know, they paint usually by themselves. But music is usually a group thing, but not always. And especially these days with the tools we have, an individual can be more like the individual painter. I mean, if you think about applying those ideas to a painter and having multiple people painting on the canvas at the same time, that's not really done. But why not? Again, you know, why would that not be okay? It would require the same kind of interaction as it does with musicians, you know, in order to have this cohesive expression on the canvas. So there's no rules, but there's different aspects of what you want to communicate and how you communicate, whether it's with multiple people or it's an individual. And that's what makes music so cool.
So I guess music could be looked upon as a language that everyone has access to express themselves, be it by themselves or with another person or with a group of people.
It's just like a conversation. You know, you can sit with, you know, and listen to a person give a lecture and talk about really interesting things, and there's people that can do that really interestingly, and other people are boring as heck, you know. Again, it comes down to communication. Or you can have a group of people in a room interacting with each other and coming up with really cool things. It's the same. It's the same. Just music is a different. Maybe I could just say it's a higher vibrational level than just normal talk, but the process is very similar.
True. I like to think, though, in closing this live stream, that, as I said earlier, music is accessible to everybody, which is what's so marvelous about it. You don't have to have the same spoken language, but you can play. And I've discovered this traveling around the world, that I can just exercise my tool, which is my instrument, with music, with anybody in the exercise room, so to speak. Whether I can speak the language or not, I can just count them in, or they can count me in, or they can, you know, just clap me in kind of thing, which is really fantastic. I just noticed that it's very interesting how technology is modifying the genres as we know it, and which is why I brought up country music, you know, that you can't deny that technology is giving them other tools in their toolkit to then create sounds and expressions that you wouldn't find in a more traditional country music piece, for example, and that as a result, these available influences or effects are modifying and shaping what new country music sounds like, for example. And therefore, what you get on stage is also a reflection on what these tools have brought to the modification of this genre, country music, for example. I'm wondering how far it might go, what we might see and hear in 10 or 20 years' time.
Who knows? Elon Musk is working with brain implant. Maybe you just do it by thinking. I don't know. That sounds really strange to
Yeah,
me.
that would be woohoo.
Yeah, you.
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Rory, do you have any last words?
I'm just, I just finished working. It's an album that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis have been working on for years to try to release their first solo album as an artist instead of always writing songs and other artists take their music. So they just finished it. I just oversaw the immersive audio mixes with them, and but it's coming out. And you want to talk about enjoying music again? It's the best of all the R&B people they've worked with. From Janet, Mariah Carey, Toni Braxton, Usher, Boyz II Men, Charlie Wilson, Mary J. Blige, I can say her. There's Mariah Carey's song just got released, but when we were in the studio and we're mixing these songs, some of these songs are from years ago. They own their masters, so they'll cut songs on artists and they don't release them. It's theirs. And they finally have taken the time to release this album. And I got the same feeling listening to this record when I first heard it off the wall, that kind of stuff, where you're just enjoying the music. You're not thinking about what instrument is that, what plugin is that, what sound is that plug. You're just listening to the song. And the songs are great. It's like anything else. I mean, we grew up with songs, and technology is a great asset to help you, to figure some things out or add a moment or lift a moment. But at the end of the day, a horrible song's a horrible song. That's all there is to it. So it's fun to listen to new music, especially from people like Jimmy and Terry who've crafted these things for years. And now they're doing their first solo album.
Yeah.
And they're, and it was guys in the studio playing, I can hear it. And so I missed that. And I'm looking for, I think there's a new generation coming in, kids that I've seen, especially like you said, the YouTube guys who can kill it, but they're just playing to the screen and not playing to with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
But there is the talent. The talent's there. So I think once we start coming out of this COVID paranoia and people start getting back together and getting in a garage and have a band start up and all this stuff, we'll see a resurgence of that era. We'll see a resurgence of things again. We're not old farts yet. We're open to everything, and hopefully we'll get to see a new generation goes away.
Yeah.
I think it's possible.
I believe it's possible. I do see a lot of talent online and in real life, and I'm excited about what the next 10 years or 20 years might bring musically and technologically. And with that said, I really want to thank you, Rory and Chris, for spending 2 hours or more with us. And I hope you enjoyed seeing each other as well. Online, unfortunately, but better than. And we maybe we need to bring you back together again and talk more about technology and music making. But for now, we have totally and utterly enjoyed your conversation, our conversation. I can see a lot of comments. I don't think anyone has questions because I think they were just awestruck by all the things they were hearing coming out of the two of you, the masters themselves. But I hope you had fun, and thank you on everyone's behalf for allowing us the privilege of spending this time with you. I wish you exciting projects ahead so you can tell us about them. I will stay in touch with you and bring you back again together, and stay safe, please.
Okay.
Thanks, Julie. Thank you. Thank you, Rory. It's great seeing you again.
Miss you, buddy.
I will send you guys an email, and I'll Rory give you Chris's latest email as well. It seems that his other one he's not responding to, which is why we haven't been getting his replies. But I'll send you an email with his current one. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Rory.
Okay.
Take care. Bye.
Please say goodbye, honey.
Oh, bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
So everyone, that was pretty cool, yeah. Boy, we could have spent another 2.5 hours with them. I just kind of scrolled through all my questions because we just went kind of on a tangent a bit. But I love tangents. It kind of makes you think a bit about all the things, all the notions that you have, and whether they should be adjusted at all, if you know what I'm saying. So next week we have another reunion of our good friends Dean Parks and Chuck Rainey, who might not have seen each other recently. I don't know. They used to both live in Texas, but Dean Parks is now in LA. So, but they spent a lot of moments in the studio on Steely Dan's Asia album. I don't know if they recorded together per se, but we'll bring them together to talk at least about the Asia album and recording with Steely Dan as the core subject of the live stream. You guys have been wonderful viewers. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and bring your friends over for our next live stream, which will be in 2 weeks, aka in a fortnight's time. If you tap the little bell symbol, you'll be alerted to when the next live stream takes place. So without any more from me, I will say see you soon and take care and be good to one another. Thanks everyone. Bye.